Hello everyone, and welcome to another Directions Mag Geospatial webinar. I am Barbara Duke, Managing Editor here to be your host this evening. We hope that you'll stop by directionsmag.com for geospatial news, articles, podcasts, and of course, more webinars. We are excited to welcome back Tom Baker, Kylie Danya, and Charlie Fitzpatrick from the education team over at Esri. As usual, they have got a great collection of tools and experiences for students and instructors, teachers, and really some great fun things if you just like a map and want to get out and do some cool stuff. So guys, welcome back. We're glad to have you with us and look forward to learning more. Charlie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and hello everybody. Thanks for being here with us. It's a treat to be able to be talking summer. This is really fun for us to be thinking about what we get to do this in the summertime. And before we get there, it's just keeping in mind that since we're all about patterns and connections and relationships and really trying to see and understand things in whatever industry, and we want people in education to be using this because they go from education out into all these other industries. So we tell people in the education realm, you got to practice, you got to be thinking about where you can do these things because you want the students to be able to do them. So we talk about getting people to explore and experiment and to do it not just a little bit, to do it extensively, to be wild in their experimentation, to get excited about some of these things. So that's what we're going to try to bring to you, is this whole vision of get out and explore. Well, get out, I mean, continue practicing your tools, the tools that you have to be able to show interesting patterns and relationships. Now, how do you do that? Well, what we're going to do tonight is work with the tools that you see in the column here. That's Map Viewer up on top. We're only going to work with that one just a little bit. We're spending more time with Survey123. That's the second one in there. And StoryMaps. That's the third one in there. That fourth one in the column, Python. That's we'll have a little bit of dabbling with that one. There are other tools that people spend lots of time with, and we want you to experiment with those. That's the instant apps, the living atlas, the scene viewer, dashboard, hub, and on and on and on it goes. There are lots of tools in here that are worth spending time with, and summer is a great time to do this if you're thinking about, hey, I want to get my class, I want to get some of the activities ready for my class when we start. Or if you're not an educator yourself, but you want to help some of them, it's good for you to be practicing as well. And so if you think about this, what you need to be understanding is some of the Esri licenses. And I want to just do a very quick exploration of licenses. And a license is software, and there's a little plus button for other stuff as well, but think about software and think about it has terms of use, and it comes at a price, whatever it is, even if it's zero at doing instruction at a school or on up. It's those combinations of software and other resources, a set of terms of use, and comes at a price. So if you're practicing in this, which tool, which license do you use? Do you use a personal one or do you use a work one? And sometimes that's a hard question to answer for you, because you think, gee, do I have personal licenses? And we have a number of them that you as an individual can be taking advantage of. First of all, when you're not logged in, it's really an anonymous license. You're still under a license, just like you are under any website. There are things that you can do and things that you can't do there, but you got a license that, and we want people to explore with that. But then you've got options to do things inside of a public account. That's free. It's for you as a person. This is one where you could say, hey, I want a family reunion map. Bang, that's a perfect thing that you could do in your public account. Some people say, I want to do that in my personal use license. I want to have my own that has my own org in it, and it has ArcGIS Pro as well. Okay, I've got to pay $100 for that, but I get it for a year, and it's mine, and it's all mine. I'm in charge of everything there. We also have a developer account that is free for just when you're thinking about it as just you alone in there. It's not, you're not doing commercial work yet. It's just you're developing that capacity. There are lots of those out there that people are using to practice, to get to know how to work with these tools, to understand what they can do with them. And now there's a new one that is just very recently out, that is the StoryMaps account. That one, storymaps.com, that one, there's a free segment that you can do, or you can do $10 a month or $100 a year. There are all kinds of ways of thinking about what it is that you want to do. But there are certain things that you'll want to do in your personal account rather than in your work account. Depends on what your work account is. If you're working for education or government or nonprofit or business, there may be some constraints in terms of what you can do as practice and exploration. We want you to practice and explore, so if you can't do it in your work thing, I mean, teachers can do some of that inside of their work account because they're getting things ready for the next class. So some of that they'll be able to do. Family reunion, that's pushing it a little bit. That's more of a personal thing. But the cost of these accounts for work, they're going to vary by seats and products and permissions. But the whole notion of personal accounts, those are great for doing a lot of practice. There's a lot of opportunity there. And your work accounts, you can do a lot of work inside there. So we want you to be thinking about how you can practice some of the things that you're going to see today. Hand it over to Tom.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charlie. What we want to do is just take a few moments and almost step back. Think about how we have collected data or how we've utilized geographic data over the summer in years past. And part of that is making sure that, especially some of maybe the new educators that are with us tonight, aware of some of the opportunities for collecting data in ways that you might not be aware of, both using some of your existing resources and some new resources as well. And I am off to a start here. So we'll back up 12 slides. So whether you realize it or not, you're probably already collecting data that has a geographic component. And I think most of us know this now. Most of us have been informed often enough that our tweets are carrying a latitude, longitude, or our photos are geotagged, or every Facebook post has a location and so on, that we realize that we're generating data with a geographic component. So sometimes that data can be leveraged. Sometimes it's not terribly efficient for most of our purposes. But what we want to do tonight is build on some of these core concepts. So in these cases, we're using an app for something other than collecting geographic information. What we want to do now is step into a very bare bones application for collecting geographic data. So this may be the case where you head out to the state park, or you walk through that botanical garden, and you want to collect the location of a specific plant, or you want to mark the route that you're going to walk a path or trail on. So one of the tools that we are finding useful, or have found useful, for collecting this kind of almost primitive geographic data, right, just points and lines, is something like Opengpx Tracker. And this is just one example. This is not an Esri product. This is just an open product. I was looking for a mobile app that was free and that would basically collect points and lines and allow me to export those. This is one example, and I've got a couple of other examples that some of you may find interesting as well. But what we can do with an application like this is collects points, and you'll see in my diagrams, the diagram on the left indicates where I've collected 2 sample points. The dot with the circle around it is my current location. And of course, the diagram on the right illustrates how we might collect a line or a track. All these data can then be packaged up into a GPX file and then shared. They can be shared with students, they can be shared with neighbors or family, and of course they can be mapped. In fact, it's so easy to map these that if you load up the classic map viewer, the Arcgis Online Map Viewer, you can simply drag and drop the GPX into the map viewer and it will map your data points for you. So the GPX, or this use of a mobile app such as Opengpx Tracker, as well as a tool like the classic map viewer combined with GPX, give you an instant way to collect points and lines, and then of course you can annotate the point. You know, this is where the red rose bush was found, or this is the trailhead, you know, for the purple trail, or whatever it is you're trying to provide some annotation for. So think about these as easy ways to begin collecting some of that primitive data as you move on into some more advanced tools that I think Kylie's going to help us begin understanding now.
All right, so that was a good look at how we can actually collect some geographic data, right? Just an app on the phone, it's going to collect our location, and we'll be able to drag and drop that into a map. Now, what if you want to make it a little bit more that you're collecting, right? Like you could annotate those points, we need to go in and do that after the fact. And maybe I want to collect some information about the points as I go. Well, here's an example of an Esri app. It's called Arcgis Survey123 that you can use to do that. It's going to look a little bit familiar. I kind of think of this like a Google form with a map. Okay, so you're going to be able to easily create your own place to collect data, and that data could be data in your head, it could be data about the world around you, it could be data you're deriving from another source, right? That's up to you with this tool. And in it, you can do things like add an image file. So we can pick a picture to include with our data. We could give it a caption, and we can give it a location. So here I've put 1, but you know, we can move the map around. It's an interactive map. So we can zoom in and out, and we can find the location that we want to mark, or of course, we can use the location that we're currently at to get that. All right, and then you can submit that data. And the cool thing is what we've done now is we're putting that data right into Arcgis Online. So when Tom collected his data, he then had to take that information and put it into the map. Well, by using this app, it's going right into the map automatically. And we can see that. So if we come in and we look at our data that has been collected with this same survey, you'll see a map, and you can see that point that I just added over here is already here in my map. Now, let's take a quick look at how we might make one of these. And I'm not going to go too far into this because we're going to see it in a bit more detail, but I just want to point out you have quite a number of things over here on the right that you can include into your survey. And you can drag and drop the kinds of questions that you want, give them names, and create a survey. You can also take that survey and share it with whoever you want to fill it out. And you can choose based on everyone publicly, people in your organization, people from a group. For those of you familiar with Arcgis Online already, these choices will be familiar. And for those of you not, it's going to be the same with all of your content that you create. Now, let's look a little bit more, because with this, like this example, I'm just going to jump back to the survey. Let's go ahead and look at it again. So it's summer playtime, right? That's kind of our theme today. And one thing you could do is create a survey like this to get some geographic data that you can then play with. So in this case, I almost think of it as like a little journal app, right? I can collect things I saw, a little caption about it, and where they are. And then I can play with that data and learn different ways to present it or different ways to analyze it and look at it. But I would challenge you, like if you're going to do this, don't make your survey quite as simple as mine, or maybe make it simple, but make it simple in your own way. For example, maybe you want to collect the name of the person who's filling it out. Now that's a good example because you might not need the name. If you're having everyone log in to fill it out, the name's already associated with their entries. But if you are maybe using that personal account and you want to create one of these to share with all your friends and family who aren't logged in, well, then you might want to ask them for their name. And then, of course, you're going to need to think about personally identifiable information, right? What information do you want to be asking people for? What will they be comfortable providing? But make it your own. Add something to this. Maybe you want to have categories of data and say, oh, this was a view, this was a site, this was a restaurant, however you want to do it. But coming up with a simple survey like this that you think is fun is going to encourage you to go in and play this summer. Now, one of the questions that we often get asked about this is, well, what if I'm not connected, right? So a lot of us are often connected. My phone has reception many places that I go. Our schools often have Wi-Fi, but not always, right? And maybe you're on a hike and it's a bit remote and you don't have reception. Can you still do something like this? Could you still use a survey and collect this information? Well, the answer is yes, you definitely can. However, there's going to be a couple steps that you're going to do to go offline. Now, one choice you actually have would be to use, instead of the browser, for all of this, if you're working offline, you're not going to be working in a browser like you just saw the survey there. You'll be working in an app you download to your phone. It's of the same name, and we'll see it in just a minute. But when you're working in there, you can choose to just download the survey and use it offline. The downside to that is that when you're working with the map, you won't see that background image of a map, right? So you'll see the dot on the screen, but you're going to have a little bit of faith that that dot is in the right place. And often that's a little bit hard to do. I would rather see a map. So if you take your survey and you set it up to go offline, including the map, then you're going to have a much better experience while you're collecting that data. So here's a workflow on screen that you can use in order to get ready to take that map offline with your survey. There are a number of pieces to it. I do want to emphasize that while there are a lot of steps, it is not an overly technical or complicated workflow. It's the kind of one where you can follow some well-defined steps and kind of like read and do. There's not a lot of inherent knowledge of how the process works that you'll need to bring with you, and we'll be giving you a resource that takes you through all of these steps in detail that you'd be able to follow along with. And that's actually what we're going to look at in just a moment here. One thing I want to point out is there are a couple different people working here, right? The person who creates the survey needs to set it up in a way that it will be able to go offline with a map. And I'll be showing that in just a minute. And then the user of the survey, while they have a connection, needs to make sure they download the survey and that map area so that they're able to use it offline. Now there's a URL at the bottom here, and I know we'll be sending these to you as well later, but that URL is going to contain all of the steps that you'll need to take this process. And it's actually what I'm going to walk you through now to kind of show you how you would do this. So here's where that URL will direct you. And you can see this is very familiar, right? We have our same 4 steps here that we're going to go through. And there's some text, and we've talked about some of this. And we can see, there's the different role of the author and the user. Now I'm going to pause here for a minute because one thing, I know a lot of us on this call are educators, and I want to point out that while we say that the author does part of this and the user does the other part, in a classroom scenario, I strongly recommend that the teacher helps with part of the user role of getting it set up on the devices, just to make it easier for the students. And you'll see a little bit of that as I go through the demo. I'll point out again when we get to that point, the things that you may want to do for your students. All right, one other thing I'd like you to notice here is that these 4 steps, as we call them out with images, just like you saw in the earlier slide, here's Arcgis Online, there's some different icons here, and that's because we're using different things. And I would say that's the hardest part of this workflow, is that for each of these steps, you're going to be working in a slightly different place. So the key is, as you transition steps, pay attention to where you need to be in order to do that step. So we'll be using the web browser, which is what you saw when I was showing that survey a minute ago, and what you saw when I was showing how it looks when you're creating that survey. Then we're going to go into Arcgis Online, and what we're going to do in there is we're going to create little chunks of map to take offline with you, and basically make the picture that will go in behind the map for the user while they're collecting data. We're going to use Survey123 Connect, which is an authoring tool, just to quickly link our survey and those areas we've created. There's not much we'll do in there. I know that one can be a little bit hard for people because it does surveys through spreadsheets and things like that. We're not even going to get into any of that. We just need to touch a setting in there. And then finally, the user or the data collector is going to use the field app when they actually do their collection, because that's where these offline workflows are supported. All right, I'm gonna scroll down and you're gonna see some videos in here to the right, and on the left you have some basic steps of what's being shown in the video. So I'm gonna go ahead and play the video. There is no sound, so don't worry if you're not hearing anything. And this is just showing the workflow you're gonna use to make a survey. Now, for those of you who've made a survey for Arcgis Survey123 before, this is exactly the process that you're used to. For those of you who haven't made one before, you'll see we're in the space that I was in when I was showing how you can change the survey. And we're just setting some different things. We're giving a title, and then we're going to add the types of questions we want to ask. In this one, I'm making sure to add a map because that's how we're going to get a location. And in this example, throughout this workflow, I'm using a playground pattern scenario about where do you spend recess and what do you do there. So that's kind of the scenario that we're going through here. Again, this could be any survey that you want to create because the steps to this do not depend on these different questions. So once we've added the map and made our survey, the other thing we have to do is publish it so that it's available. And then, of course, make sure that we've shared it so that the people we want can fill it out. Now, if you're going to be filling this out on your own, you don't need to do this, right? But if you want other people able to fill it out, you will need to make sure you've shared it appropriately. All right. So that's the first part. And that's what we already looked at today, right? This is the survey that we've made will now work online. Good to go. However, we're going to move on now to the steps that let it work offline with a map as well. So the first of those, as I mentioned, is creating areas of the map to come offline. And this is going to be done in ArcGIS Online using first the map viewer and then the information page about your map. So again, I'm going to play the video. I will likely skip chunks. But we're first getting, basically, we're making a map that contains just a base map. And in this, I'm going to add some bookmarks of the places I care about. Now, in my example, we're looking at what people do at recess. And so there's some local schools that are the areas which my study would be done in. And so I'm going to make bookmarks for each of these. The reason for that is it just makes it much easier to find them once I am making the map areas in a later step. So I'm just right now creating some bookmarks around those schools. One thing I will add is in this workflow, you do need to know the areas that the project will be covering ahead of time. So you'll see I am saying where the map works offline. And that's because that's where you're going to have the pictures to go into. Now, if you missed it, I'll back this up just a minute. From here, we've made our map and we're going right here into the item details. So that's like the metadata page about our map. So I made my map and now I'm moving on to the page to the map's details, because in here is where I can actually make those offline areas. So the process for making an offline area is not unique to Survey123. It is something that's just a part of the map, and Survey123 and some other apps take advantage of it. Here's why I made bookmarks. I want to use those bookmarks so I can easily get to the places I want to take offline, and then I can draw the area to go offline. I can use other shapes, but for simplicity, I'm just going to use a rectangle. Now, one recommendation I have here is when you're doing this process for Survey123, the name that you give this offline area is what your end user is going to see in the app. So you want to give it a name that helps them understand if they should download this particular area or not. In this case, there's two pieces of information that help me decide if I want to download it. One is where this location is, in this case, McKinley School. So I've included that in the name. And the other bit of information is what the map looks like. In this case, it's imagery. So I can have different background looks or different base maps that are available for offline use. So I want to specify imagery in the name so that it's clear which one the user will get if they download this specific area. And after that, you set a couple of properties, and I'm just going to jump this video ahead a bit. We do that for the other school as well. And then we're going to take that same map and make a streets version of it. Okay, so now I'm getting that different look, because maybe collecting data, sometimes the street view is useful and sometimes the imagery. So I'm setting it up so that both will be available to my data collectors. And I do that same process you can see where we're going to manage offline areas and create them, again, using my bookmarks, making one. And here you'll see my name is now McKinley Streets, so that in the app, the user can be successful picking the area they need. I'm going to jump ahead again. This is pretty much all that we're going to do in the video. However, there's one key step. Again, just like you needed to share the survey with the people who will use it, you need to do the same with the maps. So we're going to select those maps and make sure we've shared them with the same audience who needs them to fill out our survey. All right, so let's take a minute. What we've done right now, we've made our survey And then we've created some areas that need to go offline, but the two know nothing about each other. So that's why for our third step, we're going to jump into Survey123 Connect, which is an app that you can download for your Windows computer. And we're going to take that survey and tell it that there are areas that can go offline. So first, I need to grab a copy of that survey, downloading it to my device so that I can work with it and edit it. Once I've done that, I can come in and I'm just going to go right into the linked content. This is where I add the maps that it needs to know about to go offline. It says online map because they're made in ArcGIS Online, but they are the maps that are going to be going offline. One thing, I'm going to back it up a second because that went a little fast for me. You can see the names here are the map name. It's my whole street space map. It's my whole imagery base map. It's not McKinley imagery and McKinley streets, but those are what the user will see in the app. So right now we have to link the whole map. We're not linking just those little chunks. Those chunks are what will be used though. Okay, so we hit OK, we've added one, and we're gonna go ahead and link the other in the same way so that both of those maps will be choices while we're offline. Once we've linked them together, we get to go into the Field app and start using our survey. So this is the part that I recommend a teacher does to set it up for their students, although the students, depending on their age and their technical comfort, would be fine doing it as well if you as the teacher feel that that's appropriate. So we're going to download the survey for playground patterns that I made so that I'm able to use it on my device. Once I've opened the survey, I can come in and add offline maps. So here is where you'll see that set of offline maps, and you can see I made maps of Smiley School and McKinley School, both for streets and for imagery. Now, right now I'm setting this up for a student at McKinley, so I'm going to pick the McKinley maps as they don't need the Smiley maps, and I'm able to download those so it's ready to go. So I've downloaded the content to the device. And to show you how this is going to work, I'm actually going to put the device into airplane mode to simulate not having a data connection. So we've jumped into airplane mode, and now when I go to collect data, you will see in the map that there's a lot of empty space around it. In fact, if you were paying attention, you can see that that's the rectangle I drew when creating the map area. All right, so we're seeing that same area that we designed, and we're able to zoom in, and you'll notice you get different amounts of detail. So while it's a downloaded map, it still has all that map functionality you're used to in your internet maps, right? I can zoom in, I see more information, I can pan around on it. It's not actually an image, it's a little bit more complex than that, but it's gonna work just like your internet map, just only in that section that you've defined. So you can see it changing there as we zoom. And again, since we have two, we can switch between them and view the streets view if that's what I need to see during my data collection. So even though I'm offline, there are a couple different ways to see my information and to keep working. And the real benefit here is that I'm getting that context, right? So that when I'm collecting my data, I can see where it is. Now, I know that was a little bit fast and a bit of a whirlwind tour. That's why we have the link for you guys. I encourage you, if you are doing this workflow, to take this this story map, follow it as you're doing your work. It has the steps in the video right there for you. And you'll be able to follow along with your own maps and your own survey. So what I really want you to take away from this section that we just did is just that little bit of a sense of how to do this, but more importantly, the fact that it's possible. You can take the chunks of the map offline and do your data collection disconnected. Now, you might be doing this because you don't have Wi-Fi, because you don't have reception. Maybe you're doing it because you don't want students using data plans and uploading information. So you set up their devices so that when they're home or wherever they are, it's not using that data plan or that more expensive data. And then when they get back in the classroom, they can share all of their work and upload it when they're back in a good Wi-Fi connection. So there's a couple different use cases for this, but that's your takeaway, is you can work offline. The other takeaway I want you to have is that this story map is going to hold your hand through all of it. So while it is a bit of a complex process in terms of the number of steps, it's a fairly routine process that you'll be able to just step through with the videos to guide you. All right, so Tom showed us dragging and dropping some dots onto the map. I've shown you how we can take it and make it a little bit more of a technical data collection, right? Using an app to do all the work and even supporting offline. And I'm going to turn it back over to Tom to build some more.
Thanks, Kylie. That was great. That really shows the power of Survey123 for, especially for offline work. What we want to do now is take a quick peek at some other tools and some ideas and some exploratory things that you might find interesting depending on how you want to or maybe already do use GIS in your instruction. So we're going to build a little bit on that idea of leveraging Survey123, and we're going to do that by taking a quick look at something called Geoprojects. So with Geoprojects, what it's going to allow us to do is couple Survey123 applications like you just saw with Kylie and StoryMaps. So the power there is that you can fully architect that question that you present with students or address with students, the data collection and the mapping, map rendering back of that data. So we're going to take a quick peek at this one, and then, yeah, we'll flip back over to the full screen. Some of you may have seen this one before, but you may notice that all we've done is embed Survey123, just the regular version, inside of our story map, and then as it's used to collect data, students can begin to see what some of those data look like in mass. So some of these projects have hundreds of data points in them. Some of them already have thousands. So really, it allows you to pick a pre-built project, submit some data or have your students submit data, and then draw some visual analysis on these data in the map. The interesting thing about them is that you can use the existing templates that we have up there, which we'll look at here in a moment, or you can build your own. We've provided some additional resources, for example, if you do want to build your own. So what's already up there? There's things like the global pet survey, favorite color, trash mapping, mapping happy places, soundscapes, walkability, bioindicator project, and a tree mapping project. Now, many of these projects also have teacher resources attached to them, which are also on that Geoprojects URL. But all of this content is wrapped up in Geoprojects. It's a very easy way to jump into thinking about project-based learning with GIS. And frankly, even if you're well beyond that or not interested in any of it, feel free to share it with colleagues that you think might be. So concept number two that I wanted to share with you very briefly is this idea of adding assessment to story maps that you create. And what we've put together is a list of resources that will help you create question and answers, interactive question and answers, much like this item here, right inside your story map. So if you're assigning students to read a story map you've created, you can add a formative assessment item right inside your story map. And it gives give those students an opportunity to get feedback that you've crafted for them in advance. There's a couple different ways of building this kind of functionality out, and URL here, and again, you'll get it later from Barbary, will help you explore what type of method you really want to use to generate these questions for your student use. Okay, so in the lower right corner, you'll see the sample of an interactive assessment item that you can pretty easily add to any story map that you create. So a very powerful tool for really testing student understanding, or at least letting them test their own understanding. So tool number three that we wanted to share with you briefly is readability of story maps. So we have available to us a tool that will, when you drop in the ID number of a story map, the tool will actually tell you what the standard reading score is for that story map. So many times in education, we're trained with Flesch-Kincaid, but the story map can also provide, the readability tool can also provide the Lexile score, as well as a handful of others, depending on the type of story map. So it's a very simple tool, but can be very useful for determining the readability of a map. Okay, so that tool has a bit of a gnarly URL. It's also available for you at the end. The ID on a story map, which you'll use, and the documentation explains it, is simply attached to the URL to the very end of story map. So rather than showing you how to find it, it's on the documentation here. It's not terribly difficult. Once you do it once, it's a piece of cake. So the fourth and I think final thing for me that I wanted to share with you in terms of thinking about summer ideas is the idea of creating virtual field trips. These can take a number of forms, but as many of you probably already know, StoryMaps even has two different templates or styles that are already in place for virtual tours. You can use those, or you can build from a blank template. That's fine too. But you can either build on a guided or an explorer type virtual tour. So think about it as you're at those parks, at those, the arboretums, the nature museums, community gardens. You're wanting to document things and create a sense of place, essentially, so that if you can't take the students to this place, in the middle of winter, it doesn't make sense. They can at least visit it virtually. StoryMaps becomes a very powerful container, especially StoryMaps becomes a very powerful container for holding this content and letting students engage with it at the timing of your choice. And that does include video and sound as well. It's not terribly obvious from my slides here, but those media also embed very nicely in the StoryMaps. And I'll quickly share with you one example too that's becoming increasingly popular, and that's the use of 360 imagery inside of content, inside of StoryMaps. So for example, if we've created this map of the zoo, and at the penguin exhibit, we might launch our media. This could be anything, really. It could be a video, it could be a model, a 3D rendered model, or it could be, as in this case, a 360 photograph. And the idea is the students land here and then they can explore. And of course, with some of these media types, you can then embed and link to additional media. So if you have like a live video camera or something like that of penguins, that can be added as well. So all of this, though, is a part of that concept that's already baked into StoryMaps, that of the virtual tour. So consider and keep in mind frameworks and containers for organizing your content and sharing it back with your students later in the year. We do have a URL right now. There's limited content there, but we expect that'll be growing in the near future. So with that, Charlie, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Outstanding. Thank you, Tom. And I just want to pause for a second because there was so much that came in there that I really wanted to review quickly. The cool thing that I saw in Kylie's is we can take this simple little story survey and go out into the wild blue yonder, and we can still use it effectively, and we can grab all the photos that we want as data points. We can be doing this even when we're doing a road trip and we're out in the wild blue yonder. I can pull over to the side of the road, take a picture at it, and it can be sort of a diary, a personal diary that way. But it really takes practice, that whole notion of practice, getting accustomed to these things. And I always tell people, don't be too in a hurry to do the grand project as the first thing you do. Take a little, summer is for exploring, so take a little time to build a little trial project, and then build a little bit bigger one before you get into the grand project. So try that. And then when we're thinking about these projects, so Tom, I want to see if I got this right. There was Geoprojects, the four things. Geoprojects, so there's lots that you can do there. And there's a lot of good thinking that goes into that and good planning. And then the assessment, and I really like this notion of having a formative assessment built into a story map, but that's going to take some practice. So you really want to do that. And then, gosh, even the business people who are out there listening to this will be able to test the readability of their story maps with this tool, but certainly the educators will want to make sure that their story maps, or the people who want students to be reading their story maps, will want to know that they can do that. and then these virtual tours, really exciting things that you can be doing. Well, all of those things you can do in schools for free because we provide the software for people to use globally in instructional ways in K-12 schools and clubs. And for the geo mentors that are out there, well, how many schools have that? Well, I've only got the US here, but there are about 6,500 sites across the US right now, and that's, some of those are districts and some of those are individual schools, but you can see it on a map at this address. You can go to this address and see if your schools have one, and if they don't, then you can help them engage it and help them learn how to do some of these really cool things. Now, they don't want to start right away in something really big. They want to start small, or you want to help them start small. They may want to start off on their hiking time by hiking up Mount McKinley, but that's not necessarily the best place to start your hiking experiences. You know, try hiking in the neighborhood park. Try doing some little projects first. I mean, that's what, as a geo mentor, you're really thinking about. You want to help people. You got to establish a relationship with them and talk in the way that they are ready, willing, and able to hear and do what they are really interested in doing before taking them up the real steep inclines and down the real steep gullies. So it's a really important process to get into practicing some of these techniques, getting comfortable with them, so that if you're interested in bringing them to your students, if you're an educator, or bringing them to a local educator, if you're thinking about this from the mentor side of life, it really takes comfort, practice, being able to translate these things into the way that the listener is ready to understand. So we've got some guidance for people. You can see that there's a blog that has some guidance if you are new to thinking about mentoring. Summer is a great time to very casually do some networking. Who do I know who is the teacher that I could share this with? Well, I don't know the teacher, but I know a bunch of people, and I suspect they know an educator who might be interested in this. So networking is good. Networking out to your networks and letting them know, hey, I'm looking for people who are interested in helping their kids do this. You can give them a hand that way. Now, one of the things that people can do when they get comfortable with this, and their students have gotten comfortable with this, we have a competition in the US that is a project. Students can get into projects, but they need to have some experiences. They need to have some practice. It's tough to get that done in the school year. So we want to encourage people to be thinking about, hey, what can I be doing? What can I mess around with and learn some tools, learn some techniques on how to do that. Now, the 2022 competition, where are we? This is May 12th. The 2022 competition winners are going to be announced May 31, and there will be a webinar interview with the high school and middle school winners June 16th. So this is an opportunity for people to be thinking about what it is that they can do, what they can build toward. They can get into doing some of these data collection things, even offline, like Kylie showed. They can do some of these projects, even some of the more expansive ones like Tom was showing. And they can do this as students. Well, if their teachers help them get started, the students can take this on them. So now, let's move forward and revisit these key links. Here's a whole set of links that we're going to be able to throw into the emails for you. And we want you to be able to visit these in your own time or as you're comfortable with this.
We appreciate everyone being here this evening, and a special thanks to the team over there at Esri for sharing your expertise. Folks, keep an eye on your inbox. Like they mentioned, we will be there with a link to the recording, an attendance certificate, as well as all of these links and a reminder of that email address, just so you can contact them in the future. Lots of great information, guys. We really appreciate you being here. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody go make it
Have a
a
good night.
great rest of the week, and tell a friend about Esri and Directions Magazine. Thanks, everybody.